All right. Well, good morning, and thank you all for joining us this morning. Welcome. Good to see all of you. Friday morning book group, and this is Friday, February 19th, and we're going to talk about Bryan Stevenson's Just Mercy, an amazing book. I found it an amazing book, and I hope that you all did equally. Um, so I would like to start with something I read that Stevenson, a quote from Stevenson in a TED talk that he gave. You may have read this in the Guardian article that I sent. I can't remember if it was in there or not. But in this talk, he said, "We will ultimately not be judged by our technology. We won't be judged by our design. We won't be judged by our intellect or our reason. Ultimately, you judge the character of a society by how they treat the poor, the condemned, the incarcerated." And I felt like that summed up a lot of how Stevenson lives his life and how he goes about his profession and how he got into this profession, which was really, he wasn't expecting to be doing this, his life's work, helping the poor and wrongfully incarcerated. And so my big takeaway from this totally captivating book was the totally tremendous and unforgivable impact that racial bias and corruption has had on minority communities, the mass incarceration in our country, and the judicial misconduct that Stevenson cites is just so overwhelming. From the evidence destruction to jury tampering, and how to move forward in our legal system towards a more equitable and fair serving of justice. How do we do that? And the principle of innocent until proven guilty just does not hold true in just so many of these cases that he describes and is involved in. And just as an example, 50% of those in jail and prison today have a diagnosed mental illness and don't belong in jail in the first place. So, in spite of that, some progress has been made due to Stevenson. More than 100 people have been exonerated after spending decades in prison. And some of you may remember we discussed Anthony Ray Hinton's prison sentence in The Sun Does Shine. We did that book a while ago, and he refers to that prisoner in the book, and we discussed that, I think, a couple of years ago. So there has been some progress, and then there are questions. There are so many questions in this book to talk about, so many issues. In the epilogue, he writes, "The real question of capital punishment in this country is, do we deserve to kill? Does the government have the right to execute its citizens?" And so many other questions that are so crucial. So I think maybe we should just move on. I could just keep talking, which is no good. We'll take up the whole hour. So why don't we move on? And so for the new folks, the way we work it is you just raise your hand and I call on you, and then you unmute yourself, and you give your comment and speak. So that's how we'll do it. So who would like to talk? Trisha.
This is the second time I've read this book, and the first time I read it for the through line story of Walter Macmillan. And I kind of got lost in some of the interstitial chapters, particularly the one about adolescent development. um, kind of went over my head. But this time around, I really took notes, and I was fascinated by the structure of the book, because you get the through line story of Walter, but in between he breaks it up with some very, very profound issues, which he goes into quite deeply, actually. Children incarcerated, children electrocuted, and he does not spare us. I mean, I'm sure he spares us a lot, but we still, I'm thinking of Ray Hinton's book where he talks about smelling the execution. I think it's much more profound and foundational than I had understood originally. I've also been to Montgomery, Alabama. Has anybody else been there to see the lynching memorial?
No.
And the EJI office? He's okay. Well, enough said about that. It's worth a trip. There, everything is coming up relevant these days. I don't know if you saw this obituary for James Ridgway, but he's written a book called Hell is a Very Small Place. It's about solitary confinement, which I think is another book to read. And then also, there's another new book called Let the Lord Sort Them, The Rise and Fall of the Death Penalty. The death penalty is one of many themes that come through this book. The other thing that has made this book more meaningful to me is that last semester I took a course on Thurgood Marshall, and really got a new and vibrant sense of what it's like to be a Black lawyer in the South. And when I read Just Mercy again, I kept thinking about the tension between Bryan Stevenson going into a courtroom to face, what's his name, Judge Robert E. Lee Key, or any other of the magistrates who are, of course, they're white. So immediately there's a tremendous tension. I was also struck by the enormous burden that this man has carried. And he's never married. Well, who knows what his sex life is like, but he doesn't have a family. He hasn't married. He has to fundraise and handle this huge workload and travel. I kept thinking, my gosh, he spends hours on the road.
Yeah.
Driving to prisons and back to his office, driving to courtrooms and back to his office. It's just amazing what he has done in his life. He has, I think, had his teeth fixed. If you see anything from his early life speaking, he had terrible teeth. Now they're fixed.
Oh, that's good.
The most recent, maybe it was the only TED Talk that he gave, but it's an excellent TED Talk. He's a very compelling and attractive man in all ways. But I was so glad to have the opportunity to read it again. So I'm thankful.
Oh, I'm so glad. I'm so glad. Thank you so much for your insight. Thank you, Tricia. Very nice. Who else would like to speak?
Anne is down there.
Oh, Anne. Anne.
I found it very powerful, and he's a wonderful writer. And particularly when he was in Sweden and he heard the kids sing, the description he gave of the music.
Right.
I'm a singer, and obviously he had music in his life. Just the way, it was just so beautiful.
Yeah.
I just couldn't believe it. But it's a powerful book, and it's sad. I'm going to send him some money. I mean, I was so taken that I figure, my college has plenty of money. I can cut down on that.
Yeah.
I went to Colby, and they are just swimming in money. So
yeah,
I've given every year, but I'm going to give him some because it's.
Well, you know, I'll tell you as an aside. I'm reading the book, and I open my mail, and I get this beautiful big calendar from the Equal Justice Institute, and I'm like,
Oh my gosh.
whoa, how did this happen? And it was like no calendar I'd ever received. So the Equal Justice Institute makes basically a civil rights calendar like no civil rights calendar you've ever seen. It documents every single incident from 150 years ago, and photographs and dates, and it's huge. And so I must have, I don't remember, but I'm sure I donated at one time. But how coincidental that it came on the day that I was reading the book. So I put it in the children's, so it's on display for the Black History Month in the children's department if you want to see it. But if you donate, you'll probably get a calendar.
Oh, good. Good. No, it just was, the justice system is just horrible everywhere. It's not just the South.
Yeah.
I mean, and putting teens in with adults. I mean, what is wrong with us? At least he got that through the Supreme Court. But some of those people, I mean, McMillan, he wasn't in jail for a very long time compared to some of his other clients.
Right.
But to get Alzheimer's after all of that work that he did is just tragic. And the fact that his wife left him, I couldn't figure that. It must have been because of the affair. It's the only thing I could think of.
Right.
Because she supported him, his innocence, all the way along, but she didn't want him coming home to her house.
Right. It's just so sad. So sad. Oh, well, thank you. Thank you, Anne. Anybody else like to speak? Richard.
You hear me?
Yes.
This is the third book group I've discussed this. And I think I mentioned to you the book a while ago, how much I liked it. As you may know, I don't read a lot of nonfiction, but this book to me was so powerful, and it, frankly, I thought read like fiction. It was the first time that I read it, he'd actually spoken at Boston College about his organization, and I unfortunately missed it. It was like the week before that book group met. He spoke at Boston College. I saw the movie as well. I don't know if anybody saw the movie. It was on Amazon for free last summer with Jamie Foxx. It wasn't nearly as good as the movie. Worth seeing, but nothing outstanding. So many things hit me in this book. And the part about the children. How can you try children as adults? And how much power the judges, how bad Alabama is for justice. I know it's bad over the country, but it's got one of the worst statistics as far as convicting people. The judge has so much power there, they pretty much can determine the jury. I even remember his first, he called the judge and he said, practically said to him, what are you bothering pursuing this trial? The guy's guilty. I remember that. I had a friend, as Deb said earlier, the racial discrimination is just so prevalent in Alabama that, these poor Black people, whether they're children or what, there's such hatred among Blacks that if a Black person does anything remotely and they get caught wrong, they're basically practically screwed until, Stevenson did things to improve that. But I mean, they're a dead duck. I mean, as you know, Walter McMillan had a legitimate business. The only thing that one could say that he did wrong was maybe his carousing with women. And I guess it was really looked down for a Black man to be going out with a white woman. I mean, that was almost looked as badly as killing someone. I mean, they're dead. But I had a friend whose father was in prison in the 80s, which isn't that long ago, and this book isn't that long ago either, when you think about it. He was in prison. There was this, I don't know if it was one or more black people, but the prison guards beat the crap out of them, out of these black prisoners, just because they were black. And that was here in Massachusetts in the 80s, not that long ago. Parts I remember, even with Stevenson, when he gets practically arrested by that cop because he's listening to the Sly and the Family Stone. In the other episode where he goes to the prison and there's no way in the world they think he's a lawyer. They think he's someone that probably belongs in prison. Mm. Of course, one of those policemen sort of befriended him and apologized. And of course, he had a difficult life himself. Losing his grandfather, who was shot. I mean, that was pretty bad.
Sure.
Pretty tragic. And he grew up poor in Delaware.
Right.
So I listened to it because I had read it before. I listened to it on CD with Bryan Stevenson, and it's actually very good. He's a very good narrator as well.
He is, yeah.
So that's it for now.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Thank you. Yes, Judy. Judy, you have to unmute.
Sorry.
That's okay. You got it.
The book and the essay, profoundly moving. And I think it asks, what's the moral responsibility of a community? Somewhere in this book or the essay talks about our reading about this, but what are we doing about this? And it reminds me, growing up, I used to ask myself, how could a Holocaust happen? How could World War II happen? What was the rest of the world doing when it was happening? And now we have to ask this question of ourselves, because this is happening during our lifetime. Alabama is now. The injustices are now. And coincidentally and similarly, in today's New York Times, there's a major article on life on Native American reservations. And you can draw a parallel of a treatment of another minority or really powerless group. And so I guess it leaves us with our own moral dilemma, which is, where do we go with this information? Will other generations be reading similar stories? And how do we make a change? That's where I'm at.
Well, I thank you, Judy. I think that's a terrific question. How do we change? How do we stop people like these people down south, or the Hitlers, or the Assads in Syria, or the Putins? Or how do we stop any of these people getting power? And Stevenson talks about mercy, and I found that very, very powerful on his last page, how mercy is empowering, liberating, and transformative when it's directed at the underserving, the people who have not earned it, who haven't even sought it, are the most meaningful recipients of our compassion. How Walter genuinely forgave the people who unfairly accused him. That's a terribly difficult thing to do. Is that how we need to move forward? I question that. Is that the way forward? You know, how do we change people's mindsets? I don't know if anybody has the answer. Yeah. So thank you very much, Judy. Joanna. You have to unmute, Joanna.
I'm trying. There, I got it.
There you go.
Yeah. Great book. I did see the movie. The movie's never as good as the books.
No.
I think the whole issue now we're addressing is systemic racism. I think we are addressing it because I think as we're more aware of things we're aware of, I think the whole issue with Black Lives Matter, we're trying. I think education's the key, and we're all in our own world becoming more educated, reading books like that, discussing, and the whole issue of race has been brought up. It's interesting, I had a conversation with a friend of mine, an educated friend, and she brought up the question of why are prisoners getting the vaccines before us that are over 65? She didn't think that was fair, that people in prison, that thinking like they don't deserve it, or we are more entitled. I think that was the implication than those bad people that have done things they shouldn't have. And I try to explain, I think it's more of a scientific, and it's like how many people are impacted by the virus living together and people that visit. But her question, the whole idea that they're not deserving, right, I think reminded me a little bit of the book. Yeah, it's right. Like, because they've done something wrong, that's it. You're not even questioning, should they even be there? But also that mindset of they don't deserve anything, that kind of thinking reminded me of the book. And the other thing I want to say, that I love the book. On page 309, you have to turn to it. But the term stone catchers, yeah. I was unfamiliar with that term. And I guess it's a religious narrative with Jesus and, I don't understand, casting about stones. And yeah. Anyway, the idea that someone is throwing stones at you and the idea of catching them, I love that. Just that visual, the idea of it, so that we in our lives, when stones are being cast at us, and we can catch them instead of throwing it back in anger. The whole idea of catching stones, I love that. I just love that concept. So I think, again, change begins with us, and education is the key that will help change people in power, because we know from recent events what seems obviously the right thing with evidence, not everybody sees it the same way.
No, you're so right. You're so right. That's a very good point. Very good point. Thank you so much, Joanna. Yeah, I also love that stone catcher. I had to read it a few times to get it. Oh gosh, thank you. Pam.
Yeah. So I haven't finished the book, but I'm about 60% through it. I have owned this book for a long time and have been aware of it. Everybody said, read it. I didn't want to read it because I didn't want to be depressed and just feel terrible. I mean, my bad. But having the book group have us read it, I read it. It is, to me, it was, despite the appalling things it writes that are in it, some of which I wasn't even aware of, I find it totally uplifting and hopeful. And I think about the good in people. He is such a good person.
Yeah.
It's just, we have to celebrate that. And, just as some of you were talking about donating, I mean, that's something I can do.
Right. Right.
But
Good.
it's just such a powerful book. And like Richard said, it's not a novel, but it reads as easily as a novel,
Right.
which was another thing I really liked about it.
Right.
But so thank you for doing it for the book group.
Thank you. I have to say, I've wanted to do this book for a long time, and it's been so popular that I just couldn't get enough copies till now. So now I got enough copies. It's taken a long time. It's been so popular. So this is good. Yeah. Oh yes. Sharon.
I read the book a while ago and then saw the book club announcement, and I just thought, I want to hear what people are thinking, and so I'm so happy to be part of this. I'm sorry I have to sign off in a minute to go back to work, but I just was transfixed by this book, and his writing style. I found him. We're reading such painful, awful stories, and he made it in a way that really kept me going. I'm so glad with all the MacArthur grants and everything that every time we keep hearing about a recognition for him, I'm cheering him on, and I hope the fundraising doesn't take up so much of his time, because as you all said, like, it's astounding what he has sacrificed to do this work.
Absolutely.
I did want to share that through Temple Beth Elohim, where I'm a member, my daughter and I have joined this group called Partakers, and we are paired with a particular prisoner at MCI Norfolk, and it serves prisoners who are taking graduate work, coursework. And so it's not just paired with any prisoner. You're there to be a mentor, because with the thinking that really they have no one to talk to about their studies. They can't talk to their prison guards about it. Sometimes their family members, aren't so interested, and there's troubles going on in the family that doesn't make it, a conversation that seems important. So we're not there to be, I'm not a social worker, or we're not there to be social workers or psychologists or, legal aid, but we're there to talk to them about the coursework that they're doing and to give them encouragement. And we started before COVID, and then obviously since COVID, it's been a little difficult. But in terms of thinking about what we can do, the program is called Partakers, and I don't think you have to be a member of my temple to do it. So just wanted to make everyone aware of that.
Oh, thank you so much. How do you spell that? Partakers?
It's one word, Partakers.
Oh, okay. Partakers. Very nice. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that.
Thanks for doing this, Deb.
Thank you. Hope to see you again.
I will.
Yeah. Okay. Bye-bye. That's great. All right.
Tanya keeps trying to come in.
Tanya, you just need to unmute.
Goes back.
Oh, there you are.
I hope. Okay.
You're okay. You turned off the video, but that's okay.
Let me put on the video.
Okay.
Okay. I wanted to thank you, first of all, for picking such wonderful, interesting books, and I learned so much from it. It was very useful to me to learn about the penal system, and of course, it's very disappointing what's going on in the justice system. Most of all, I was very upset about learning about the mental state of the children in the prisons, and that was really very upsetting to me. But I thought that he did such a wonderful job, not only describing everything, but also going to visit the families after the verdicts and keeping in touch with them all this time. And even now, when he has expanded, he has like 20 people working for him. Yeah. And he's still in touch with the people that he liberated actually from prison. And most of all, it was very upsetting to me about sitting there in a little cubicle, a little boy that came from a very disturbed family and all this. So I thought that book was excellently written, and I just enjoyed reading it. And thank you again.
Oh, you're so welcome, Tanya. Thank you for joining us, and thank you always for being there. Appreciate it. Thank you. Yes, Vanya.
Yeah, I want to say the same thing. Thank you for picking this book. And like, I had so much to say, like everybody. I made bullet points so I wouldn't ramble. So the first thing is obviously like immense admiration for what he is, what he has done, his endless, ceaseless, tireless work in this area. The second thing, and I'm just going to acknowledge it, is I didn't know how bad the racism, how prevalent it is. You have a sense of it, but until I read this, I had no idea of how deep it ran and how broadly it's prevalent in certain parts. Mm-hmm. And so I grew up in Africa. Like, I was the minority. Everybody around me was African, not African American, but African. Mm. And I'm of Indian origin. And then I lived in London. Then I lived in New York, Cincinnati, Connecticut, New Jersey. Wow. And now Massachusetts. So you think you have an awareness of people and places. Yeah. I did not know this until I read this book. And of course, and living overseas, people have a sense of what America is. Until the riots last year, maybe the racism was something we knew, but outside people didn't know. So 20 years I lived in this country. I didn't know Alabama was like this until I read about it. So I am grateful for this eye-opener. And, you know, so I'm ashamed that I had minimized it in any sense and anywhere, because I didn't know how deep it could be, you know. And so I'm just going over the individual stories are heartbreaking and sorrowful, but I'm just going over the overarching things. The judicial bias, there's bias, and also that the system is not infallible. Like, as good as we have made it, like America, this young country, this experiment, and yet there is mistakes everywhere throughout the judicial system. But then when I finished the book, I felt like, I think Pam might have said it, I ended on this sort of hopefulness, because this one person in his single lifetime has brought about all these wonderful, you know, changes. And that makes me very hopeful that we as a society can see it. And in 10 years, in 5 years, in 20 years, changes are happening. And this, I think, again, is the beauty of America and people, that it gives me immense hope that in a single generation, this much could happen, even though for so many generations past, there was this incarceration. Yeah. So that I sort of, as sad as I was, I then felt grateful. Mm-hmm. And then to answer Judith's point of view about what do we do? You know, this is the Holocaust happening in front of us. How do we, I think the awareness is the first step in knowing, like, you can't do anything about something you don't know about. And people like him have brought awareness, you know, to this issue in particular. But you know, there's so many Bryan Stevensons out there. So anytime we have this awareness, and I applaud you, Deb, for choosing this book and bringing it to mine awareness, you know, because now we're all talking about it, and we're all going to do something, our donations or whatever it is we're going to do. And if nothing else, I'm going to talk about it and have it with me, you know, and not judge in my naivety that, you know, America is equal or whatever. I mean, every society can improve.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. So thank you for choosing the book. And I'm happy to be part of this discussion today.
Well, thank you so much. I'm so happy you could join us. But Vanya, you should never feel ashamed, because people who have lived here their entire lives don't know this. They don't know what's going on. They don't know what's going on outside their state, sometimes outside their county. So never feel shame or embarrassment. You know, we all need to be educated. We all need to be educated. So thank you very much.
Thanks.
I'm going to look for someone who has not spoken, and then I'll take you, Anne. Anybody who has not? Oh, Irene.
I read this book a while ago, but I didn't reread it. But I've been reading Caste.
Oh.
And you're going to have a hard time getting extra copies.
I know.
But it is fascinating reading how she compares the racism in this country to the caste system in India, and how the Nazis developed how they would treat the Jews. And they based it so much on laws in the South that were against the Negroes at the time, the blacks.
Wow.
So, you know, there's a lot in that book that I'm reading that I never knew existed. And she writes absolutely beautifully.
Yeah.
Isabel Wilkerson, I think it is.
Yeah.
And I had read her other book, The Warmth of Other Suns, which is about the migration from the South to the North. And that was a fascinating book. I didn't know much about that either. So that's.
Yeah. They're all very important books. I'd love to do her first book, The Warmth of Other Suns, when I can get enough copies. We'll do that with the group. I think that would be good to do.
Yeah.
Anne.
I just wanted to say quickly that even though the movie wasn't as good as the book, I think the movie would go to expose more people to it that wouldn't necessarily read the book first. And if they watch the movie, they might go to the book.
Yeah.
Because it's not a book that everyone would just pick up.
No, it's not.
So I think that having a movie makes it, hopefully.
Yeah. I see what you're saying. Yeah. Tricia.
I find it very ironic that we are hearing this week, there's been a lot of press coverage and concern about the impact of COVID restrictions on our teenagers and the mental health decline. And I'm thinking, we don't have a shred of experience about what it's like to be truly isolated in solitary confinement or in a jail. I went to Alcatraz a number of years ago, and the cell blocks, there are walls, solid walls on 3 sides of a cell, and only in the front is there a grid. I didn't even see cells that had only a door with a little opening. But if you're in that kind of situation, you don't see anybody. You can't see faces of people who are 2 feet away from you. And, you know, here we are worried about the mental illness I mean, it's good that we're worried about the mental illness for adolescents in particular, all of us.
Yeah.
But it just seems ironic when we're reading about incarceration and the impacts of incarceration.
Sure.
Also, I just want to pick up on Richard's point about the issue of Black men and white women. I don't know if you can see this, but this is a plaque that's on the wall at the Lynching Museum.
Mm.
And it says, Warren Powell, 14, was lynched in East Point, Georgia in 1889 for frightening a white girl. And then we get back to Emmett Till, who was killed, tortured, God knows what, for I don't, the issue of.
He just looked at a white woman.
Looked at a white woman.
Right. They said they didn't prove it.
Yeah. But what has come clear to me from reading about Thurgood Marshall and Frederick Douglass, all the rest of it, the white men in particular are huge. While they would rape and father children with Black women, they're very afraid, sexually afraid, of Black men and Black men with white women.
Yeah.
It's a very, very deep fear.
Yeah.
That then I think produces this terrible rage and hatred.
Yeah.
Enough.
Yeah, no, you brought up such good points, and you could really go on and on. We could take a whole course, a whole term on this. It's huge. It's huge. I mean, look at Thomas Jefferson, right? Mm. I mean, we could talk about this. We could read a lot of books about this. I think, there's so many aspects to it. He says, one of my takeaways is from Stevenson, how our brokenness is also the source of our common humanity and the basis for our shared search for comfort, meaning, and healing. So if we can, if these people can realize that, we're all broken. It's not just the people who they put in jail. Everybody is broken in some way. Can we share that? That is where we reach our humanity and we reach out to the next person. And that's where we find mercy and compassion. We just have to strive for this. And he's doing it. He's just they call him the American Mandela. He's just an amazing man. And, we can only hope that there'll be more Bryan Stevensons, So, I'm so glad that everybody felt the book was so powerful. I'm really glad. I felt the same. So, anybody else who has not spoken like to speak? Jillian?
Hi, thank you for choosing this book. I too, like Pam, had it on my shelf, and I have not gotten to it. I watched the movie first because it was an easy way to get introduced to the book. I cried. The Selma was another movie I watched afterwards. That one really made me cry. But anyway, so as I was reading this book and thinking about racism as well, not just about the injustices in this prison system and how there's a racial bias toward African Americans in the system, I also just thought about overall racism in general, because this past weekend, Asian American community had come together to address the coronavirus pandemic and its effect on Chinese Americans, or just Asian Americans in general, being attacked just randomly on streets. And I am in Wellesley, and I'm not sure where you guys are, but it happened a couple of weeks ago and also last year at Whole Foods, and on the street, woman got spat on and told the Chinese woman to go back to China. And in Whole Foods, a man walked up to a Chinese woman and told her, like, she had just come from donating a bunch of masks to like 100+ masks at a nursing home, and she went shopping, yet this gentleman came up to her and said, this is because of you, pointing at his mask, and she felt very attacked. But at that time, in the Whole Foods scenario, she had other women that come with her, other non-Asian women who spoke up for her and defended her, and told her afterwards that, if you need additional help, please call me, and gave her, lots of support. So she felt okay after that. But the lady who got the spit and the yelling, she didn't really have anybody there. She said people just kind of walked away from the situation. Mm. So, the question of what do we do now? After I reading this book, my first question is, now what? I have to do something. I think first thing is probably communication is definitely key. And Martin Luther King has always said people fear because they don't know each other. They don't know because they don't communicate. So I thought that was one way we could do like this book club and raise awareness, like Vanna said, or maybe somebody else said it, I'm not sure. That's key. And I was thinking, what else can we do? Because the lady who got spat on, she did go to the police, the Wellesley police, but it is not really a crime in a sense that she didn't get punched, or none of her things were, broken, like her home didn't get robbed or nothing. So they didn't really address it as a crime. They did file a report that there was nothing they could do further than that. My husband and I, who's also an Asian American, we discussed this and we thought, where could she have gone? ACLU, where could she go with this? She started with, telling the community, who also had non-Asian select board members come and speak. But we thought, well, and then what? What do we do? So that got me kind of stuck. We thought about education is key. And I've decided as a mom, I need to raise my daughters to really think outside the box, and also, I don't know where to start, but, I'm still figuring it out myself. As an Asian American, we're more invisible because we don't raise voices. We don't come together to have like the African Americans, they're more able to speak up, and they gather and they have marches, but we're more of a behind the scene quiet until coronavirus hit and Trump called it China virus. Yeah, I think Asian American community do think of it as, yes, it is from China. Some people have alluded, yeah, we agree that, but we all are just as suffering as you are. We're not having party while we're watching the rest of the world suffer. So I guess I'm kind of, being sidetracked to coronavirus pandemic, but this book, in the end, I was really moved by his passion for his work. And I hope to raise my daughters like him to really stand up for those who don't have a voice, or who are shy, like our community, and want to kind of hide and work hard and just do your thing. And I think I wanted to after reading that as a mom, I wanted to raise my daughters to speak up more and to help the community more, and not just Asian Americans, but all races, so that was the takeaway for me. Just he was such an inspiring figure for me. Just the part, especially Deb, when you sent the article after reading the book and reading the article, the part he says his understanding of rich, he's poor, he's not making tons of money. He could have, but he chose this road. And he said, my understanding of richness is so much different from other. He says his life is so much more richer for what he's doing than any money or millions of money could buy. And as an immigrant, it's hard not to focus your children on, yeah, you got to go to the right school, make the right money, have a certain status, live in a certain neighborhood so you don't get racially, attacked or whatever. But it made me think again about, how do I want to raise my children? Like, how do I want to educate them? It's not just, it does help, but having a good education, like going to colleges, but what else? How do I want them to have? What kind of values do I want them to have? So that caused me, this book and then the article made me think more about my role as a mom, how to speak to my children, how to raise them in a proper way.
Good. Very good. Thank you. Thank you very much for your comments and your insights. I appreciate it. Thank you.